In the small Midwestern town of Clearwater, life moved at a peaceful pace. Farms stretched out as far as the eye could see, and everyone knew their neighbor. It was the kind of place where doors were left unlocked, and people gathered at the local diner every Sunday for pie and conversation. But that spring, the sky began to act strangely, as if it had a secret to tell. It was a warm April afternoon, and the air had a heaviness to it. Old farmers like Mr. Hargrove, who had lived through every kind of weather imaginable, noticed the subtle signs. The wind had shifted, and the sky had taken on a strange, greenish hue. As the hours passed, a growing sense of unease settled over the town. Birds stopped singing, and even the cattle seemed restless, pacing the fields nervously. Emma, a 12-year-old girl with a curious heart, stood by her bedroom window, gazing at the horizon. She had spent most of her childhood exploring the woods and streams around Clearwater, always eager to uncover the mysteries of nature. But that day, something felt different. The air was thick with humidity, and the leaves on the trees had stopped rustling. Her father, Dan, was a volunteer firefighter, and he had already received warnings from the county's weather service about the potential for severe storms. He had lived in Clearwater his whole life and had seen his fair share of thunderstorms, but today felt off. He gathered his family, Emma, her younger brother Tommy, and their mother, Lily, into the living room. "Looks like we might get some rough weather tonight," Dan said calmly, though his eyes betrayed his concern. "I want everyone to stay close. If we need to head to the cellar, we'll go quickly." As evening fell, the wind began to howl outside, rattling the windows and sending loose debris skittering across the streets. The once peaceful skies had turned ominous, with dark clouds churning overhead, twisting and shifting in unnatural patterns. Flashes of lightning illuminated the sky in brief, electric bursts, and thunder rumbled like a distant, angry drum. Then came the sirens. The piercing wail echoed through the town, cutting through the howling wind like a knife. It was the tornado warning. Dan didn't waste a second. "Get to the cellar!" he shouted, grabbing Tommy under his arm while Emma and Lily raced ahead. They had practiced this drill before, but never in a real emergency. The storm cellar was built beneath the house, accessible through a heavy trapdoor in the kitchen. It was a small, cramped space, reinforced with concrete walls and stocked with essentials like water, flashlights, and blankets. The family huddled inside, listening to the chaos outside. The wind had reached a fever pitch, screaming through the trees like a living thing. The sound was unlike anything they had ever heard, a deep, guttural roar, like a freight train barreling across the fields. Above them, the house creaked and groaned under the force of the storm. Emma clutched her mother's hand, her heart racing. "Is it a tornado, Dad?" she asked, her voice trembling. Dan nodded grimly. "Sounds like it." The next few moments felt like an eternity. The roar grew louder, until it seemed as if the whole world was being torn apart. Emma squeezed her eyes shut, trying to block out the terrifying sounds. She could hear things crashing above them, windows shattering, furniture being thrown across rooms, trees snapping like twigs. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the noise stopped. The silence that followed was almost as unnerving as the storm itself. The family stayed huddled together, too afraid to move. After what felt like hours, Dan cautiously opened the cellar door. The first thing he saw was the sky. It was eerily calm, the storm clouds having moved on, leaving behind a strange stillness. But the sight that greeted him when he stepped outside took his breath away. Clearwater was unrecognizable. Houses were reduced to rubble, their roofs torn clean off. Trees were uprooted, lying twisted and broken across the roads. Cars had been tossed like toys, flipped over and scattered in every direction. The once familiar landscape had been transformed into a scene of devastation. Emma and the rest of the family emerged slowly, taking in the destruction. Their house, like many others, had been badly damaged. The roof was gone, and the windows shattered. But they were lucky. Some of their neighbors' homes had been completely leveled. Despite the overwhelming destruction, the town sprang into action. Dan and the other volunteer firefighters worked tirelessly to search for survivors, while the rest of the community banded together to help those in need. Clearwater was a small town, but its people were resilient. They had weathered storms before, though none quite like this. In the days that followed, the town began the slow process of rebuilding. The local church opened its doors to families who had lost their homes, and the diner became a hub for organizing relief efforts. Volunteers from nearby towns and cities arrived with supplies, and the sense of community grew even stronger in the face of adversity. For Emma, the tornado was a lesson in both the power and unpredictability of nature. She would never forget the sound of the wind that day, or the way the sky had looked before the storm hit. But she also learned something else, that even in the darkest moments, people could come together to rebuild and heal. Years later, when she had grown up and moved away, she would often think back to that April day in Clearwater. And though the town had been scarred by the storm, it had emerged stronger than ever, proof that even the fiercest tornado could not break the spirit of a community bound by love and resilience.